Malcolm here, and welcome to Corporate Worship Matters, Episode 4. And today we're having a second bite at the topic of trends. We looked at trends about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, talking about testing the trends and finding out what people are listening to, the Christian music they're listening to, the recordings on their various devices or the Christian radio stations. What are members of our churches listening to? And what are the trends in the Christian culture around us in our own family and fellowship of churches, but also in other denominations and other Christian gatherings? What's going on? What's new? What's different? And just discovering them, because the trends have an influence on us, whether we realize it or not. So that was our first look at trends. The second look at trends is this, that having found out what the trends are, we need to test them. Test the trends, because not everything in the Christian culture is useful. Not everything is beneficial. As Paul said to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 40, everything should be done, he's talking about corporate worship here, everything should be done in a fitting and orderly way. A fitting and orderly way. If that's the case, we need to think about why we adopt the trends or the new practices that we do and why we reject other ones. What's the reason why we would adopt something and reject something else? So I have some thoughts here on this today. First of all, some filters. Some new practice has come to your attention, some new idea has been brought to you, and it's time to think about how to filter whether these are going to be good or not. Now, number one, filter number one is the doctrine filter. So we pick up our Bible, either physically or we have a look at our thoughts about what we believe the Bible teaches on a particular topic, and we ask ourselves, does this particular practice contradict any teaching of the Bible, any commands of the Bible, or any principles that are taught in the Bible? So the first thing is the doctrine filter. The second thing is the distraction filter. In other words, does this particular practice help people's focus on God, or does it distract them from God? I was talking to a friend of mine a few years ago who was in a congregation where a person separated themselves at the back of the church congregation from everybody else and went into the central aisle and started dancing down the aisle. They danced all the way down the aisle to the front and sort of presented themselves to the people at the front. And I think they told that person they weren't allowed to do it anymore. And that person took great offense, saying, well, you know, David danced before the Lord with all of his might, and look what happened to the people who opposed him. And who are you to say that I can't do this as an expression of the joy of the Holy Spirit within me? And I'm not saying there's not a place for dancing, but the point was, in that particular congregation, that person walking down the aisle dancing, what did it do to their corporate worship? It was a major distraction. No one was thinking about God or the song they were singing. They were just looking at this person dancing down the aisle. Dancing can be incorporated in our church service, I think, in a very positive way. It was my privilege a couple of years ago to be in Ghana, and I preached at our congregation there in Accra. I had a wonderful time, and during the church contribution phase, people danced down the aisle with their contribution, came to the front, placed their money into the receptacle, danced to it, danced around it, danced back. Some of them hung around at the front, danced a bit more. Some of them went back to their seats. I thought it was wonderful. I didn't join in, but I thought it was wonderful. Dancing depends on the context, right? So the question is, in our context, for our congregation, will this particular idea or this trend, this practice, will it distract people or not? So firstly, doctrine filter. Secondly, distraction filter. And thirdly, direction filter. Does this particular practice point people towards God or themselves or something else that's not helpful at this time? 3 questions to ask. Does this practice pass the doctrine filter? Does it pass the distraction filter? And does it pass the direction filter? So 3 filters first of all. There are trends around us, and some of them contradict doctrine or biblical principles. Some of them do contradict the idea of not distracting people and having fitting and orderly worship, and some really aren't about God. So do your own homework, do your own thinking about it, but apply those filters, and I think that will help you to know whether to adopt a particular practice or not. Now here's the thing though, the thing that's more tricky than that is that often whether to adopt a particular thing is a bit of a, it depends. It could be good, it could be not so good. It could be healthy, it could be less than healthy. It could be helpful, it could be unhelpful. It depends. It depends on many things. Now, what do we do when it depends? We can't point to a Bible verse that says that thou shalt not do that, or thou must do that. What do we do when it depends? Well, I've got 3 thoughts here for us. Number 1, when it depends, discuss it with God. Number 1, discuss it with God. In other words, pray. Pray for insight. Pray for insight as to whether this is a good thing to adopt for your church, but also pray to gain personal insight as to what your feelings are about this practice, whether you really want to adopt it because you like it more than it's actually helpful for the church, or whether you want to oppose this doctrine. Over your dead body we will do this in my church, simply because it doesn't fit who you are. Frankly, we do quite a lot of things in my congregations and the congregations where I am, and which aren't really my preference, and I probably wouldn't adopt them unless I knew that it helped many other people. But that's okay. I've got to be comfortable with the fact that I'm a servant, and if I lead worship, it's about what helps the congregation, not what my preferences are. We need to discuss things with God so that our prejudices and our preferences don't rule the roost when it comes to what's acceptable and practiced in our local corporate worship setting. So that's number 1, discuss it with God. Number 2, then discuss the particular trend or idea with your worship team. It's so helpful to have your whole worship team of one mind in this, or even if they don't agree, at least to talk about it together, and then if you do adopt it, to know why you've adopted it. We need oneness in our worship teams, and just one person unilaterally declaring, yes, we're going to do this, or no, we're not going to do this, is not exactly helpful for the oneness that we need in our worship team. So discuss it with your worship team. And then thirdly, having done that, discuss it with your church leadership team. Any significant change to the way that we practice corporate worship can be disturbing. Now, that disturbance can be for good, can be creative, or it can be negative and harmful. Talking about it with your church leadership team may help you to discern which side of that balance you are. Having discussed it with God, and having discussed it with your worship team, and then having discussed it with your church leadership team, I think it's very likely that you will come to a consensus and a clarity about whether to do what you're thinking of doing or stop doing what you're thinking of stopping. 3 discussions to have. So I'm not going to offer any definitive position of my own on any practice, whether it be dancing or not. I don't think you'll see me dancing down the aisle anytime soon. But my point isn't about a particular practice. My point is about whether we've really thought it through. Have you thought through your current practices? Have you thought through clearly why you're going to adopt new ones or not adopt new ones? You need that clarity, and so does your congregation. So I commend these ideas to you, and I would like to know whether they're helpful to you. I'd like to know what you do when you're faced with a decision about whether to do something or not, to incorporate something from perhaps another Christian tradition or not. What helps you to make up your mind? Please leave a comment here where we can all read it and see it, because we learn best when we learn in community, right? I would love to know your thoughts. And if you can, pass this on to somebody else who might benefit and whose worship team or corporate worship setting might benefit from these ideas and the other videos and recordings on the Corporate Worship Matters website. Thanks so much for your attention. I do thank you, and I don't take the fact you've given me your time here for granted. I'm very grateful for your willingness to take some of your precious time to do this, but do let me know what you think as well. Until the next time, I hope you have a wonderful time of corporate worship whenever this week you gather with other Christians to worship our great God. Take care, and God bless.